Hi, everybody. I think before we jump in, since we have a pretty small group, I'd love if you guys wouldn't mind to just do a quick run around the room, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and kind of maybe where you're from, what kind of work you might do, and how you may be connected to safety funding or traffic safety or anything to transportation in general.
I'm Don Herman, Boise. I work as an appraiser, and I drive the roads. Don't worry about safety. Other people drive like idiots.
I'm Andrew Studley. I live in Cuna. I'm interested in lots of things.
That's great, thanks, Andy.
I'm Sharon Fisher. I live in Cuna and I go to meetings for fun.
That's awesome. Me too. Thank you.
I'm Jim Hansen. I'm ACHD Commissioner,
Thank you.
and I'm on the board at Compass too.
Very good.
Gene Strait, Kelly, Jersey. This is my wife, Karen.
See, thanks, Karen.
I'm Tina Fuller. I work for Compass.
Yeah.
Jim Klein, Klein Engineering, but I'm acquainted with Brian when he was in Missouri.
Yes, Jim and I have a history, as I'm sure he has with everyone in the world, it seems like. Thanks, Jim.
Hi, I'm Brent Jones. I'm the Highway Safety Manager at the Idaho Transportation Department. Our office is responsible for behavioral infrastructure and highway safety research program.
Okay, thanks.
Jerry Little, the Traffic Department Manager at Ada County Highway District. And I've been working in traffic safety for 40 years and still trying to get it right. Here to learn.
Thanks, Tim.
Lisa Aikman, I'm a principal fund with Compass.
Mike Dickens, spouse of Lisa Eakin, drug to this meeting only because I drive too on our roads and I'm interested in this as well.
Great. Zach?
I'm Harley Parson. I was the systems analyst for Compass for 5 years, from '99 to 2004. And I have the website cycleido.com, so I advocate for bicycling access throughout the state.
Okay, very good, thank you. Excellent, all right. So then to start, I'm just kind of making the pitch for safety. So the traffic safety problem in the United States is that there's more than 30,000 fatalities per year. So these are people who are killed in traffic collisions on the roadway, which is more than 80 per day, and that's kind of what this represents. It's also a worldwide problem. There's 1.3 million fatalities worldwide in roadway crashes, and that's everything from pedestrian crashes in developing countries to the crashes that we talked about here in the United States, even here in Idaho. And the thing about those, sometimes those numbers can be a little daunting, and the thing that I think is important about those and about each of those kind of paper doll cutouts is that each of those is an actual person. So rather than just, it's easy sometimes, even myself as a safety engineer, to be thinking about the numbers a lot and driving down the numbers, and it helps oftentimes for us to stop, for me to stop, and think, these are actually really people, like people with names. These are, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, teachers and coaches of people in the community. And so anytime that we can do whatever we can to reduce those fatalities, we're helping obviously the people whose lives that are saved, but also kind of their whole community, the circle of influence they have over their family, friends, and others that they run across. So it becomes a pretty important thing, pretty personal thing for us who do this work on a daily basis. In Idaho specifically, as was mentioned, there's more than 200 fatalities each year, more than 1,200 serious injuries each year, and most of these are preventable. We'll talk a little bit about that, about kind of why I believe that to be true. And then here in this region, in Ada and Canyon counties, there are 35 fatalities per year on average over the last 5 or 6 years. Again, each of those is an actual person, an actual story, so do what we can to try to address those. These are kind of where they have occurred. So these are the fatal crashes in 2007. You can see the dots there is a fatal traffic crash. And one thing that I like, kind of audience participation time, is take a look at this map. What I'm going to show you next is actually a series of maps. It's the exact same map with fatal crashes for the next few years through 2013. And I'd like you to just take a look at that and then kind of let me know what you think once we get through it. So this is 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Anything jump out at you as you saw those?
Move around.
Yeah, they move around quite a lot. Yeah, other thoughts?
They were all on arterials.
They're
All kind of look like they're on arterials, the ones that showed up.
they're random,
They seem to be random.
yeah,
Yeah.
because of the numbers. 35 is not a big number.
Yeah, any other thoughts?
I didn't notice how many were on the interstate.
Oh, good question. Let's kind of go back and maybe just look at that. See, not very many in this year. We'll go backwards, and there's a couple in 2012. A few, but not very many. Something that we find is that the interstates, as you might imagine, they tend to feel the scariest sometimes because they're very high speed, because they have maybe the bulk of the trucks are on the interstate system, at least in some regions. But they're also built to the very highest standards. So if we get to things like how are these roadways designed, how are the curves treated, how are the design speeds treated, interstates are definitely kind of the cream of the crop, right? They get the most attention. They tend to get the most money per mile in terms of how they're cared for, both in terms of the original installation and maintenance over time. And so you'll see that it tends to be, I wouldn't say misnomer, but sometimes it seems like, oh, being on the freeway is very scary. But actually the freeway tends to be, on average, at least in terms of crash rate, where if we normalize by how many miles are on those interstates, tend to have the lower or even the lowest crash rate of most types of crashes, partially or mostly because of the way they're designed. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
It seems like the majority are at intersections.
Yeah, a lot of intersections. I'd agree. It does definitely has come out that way. I would say that some of these I'm not exactly based on the scale of the map. Like here's an example down here at Deer Flat Road. Yeah, that one maybe is at the intersection. Maybe it's just north of it. I'm not exactly sure. But you're right. I think that there are a number of intersection crashes, fatal crashes. We'll take a look at that in a second. So I'm going to go back through the list. Any other thoughts?
There's not a lot in the inner city, which of course is where the traffic's not moving as fast.
Yeah, it's a good point. So there aren't as many in the inner city. Right, the lower speeds are a reason for that. Definitely just more traffic, more congestion. Actually, in some cases, when you're talking about just fatal crashes, congestion kind of helps you not have them because your speeds are lower. So even though you may have more fender benders, and there sometimes can be a concern of having a crash in evening rush that could create a secondary crash. And those secondary crashes can sometimes be severe because someone comes over a hill or comes around a curve and doesn't expect to have to stop. But you're right, that central business districts don't tend to have as many severe crashes, mainly because of speed. Yeah.
Are these all vehicle-related crashes? That means single vehicle, multiple vehicle, pedestrian bicycle?
This would be from, and this is from what I understand of the Idaho Motor Vehicle Report. And I'm somebody from your staff, I think Terry is maybe the one who sent me the maps.
This one.
Is that
No,
true?
those are
Or did you send me the map? You sent me the maps. I think that the crash report, the way I understand it, this is the same in most states, it needs to involve a motor vehicle to be in the crash report database, which obviously is an issue, right? It doesn't include bike crashes or a single bicycle crash that doesn't involve a motor vehicle. So it's typically, but it would be a motor vehicle hitting a pedestrian and there being a fatality, a motor vehicle hitting a bicyclist and there being a fatality. Those would show up here. Yeah, Terry.
I was going to say you have a higher percentage of those that are close to the downtown core would be peds and bike related. You know, the speeds are lower, there's so many more peds and bikes and conflicts and things going on down there. You can certainly find a good percentage of those being ped and bike related.
Yeah, potentially, sure, yeah. Yeah, without digging in, I haven't dug into the data in detail, but yeah, I think that's could be seen. All right, one other thing we're gonna look at here, kind of a similar exercise, is now we're gonna look not at the location of those crashes, but at the attributes, the most common attributes of crashes over a few years. I'm gonna start this time just in 09, so it kind of dropped off just to have, so I only have room for a few years here. These are the top 3 common elements. So this isn't necessarily 1, 2, 3, but these are the 3 most common elements of, oh, I didn't do this right, I'm sorry. The most common fatal crash attributes. So these are the most common elements that show up in fatal crashes in these 2 counties here in the region. In 2009, those 3 were intersections, as come up, so nice job in identifying those. Aggressive driving, which is typically defined as speed-related crashes would be aggressive, lane changing, or if the officer had reason to believe that it was an aggressive driving crash, and then impaired driving. alcohol or other drugs. So-
Is texting in there?
Not an impaired, that's actually called distracted driving, and it has a separate place on the form. That's a whole other issue. Actually, we'll talk about distracted in a minute, whenever we look at a couple other things. So I do want to talk about that one specifically. It's a tough one because it can be underreported, because it's hard to tell sometimes, and it's relatively new. Like in the last decade, it's really come to prominence versus some of these are, 50, 80 years old. All right, so your job now is look at this first year, 2009, and pick out the one of those you expect to see in one or more of the following years, or maybe most of the following years. All right, everybody kind of have one in mind?
Already got it, I know what it is.
All right, here we go. So here's 2010, 2011, 2012,
Yeah.
2013. How'd you do?
Yep.
Aggressive, all the way.
Yeah, so hopefully pretty well, right? So impaired is on there almost every year. Aggressive is there all 5 years. Intersections are there 4 out of 5 years. The one that pops up a couple years there is run off the road crashes, which isn't unexpected. To me, that's a pretty common crash type as well. Particularly for those ones that were maybe a little bit outside the main city area because your speeds are higher. You got folks potentially running off the road. Any thoughts, comments on this information? Anything surprise you here, or something you expected to see that didn't?
It would be good to have a better definition of what was aggressive and so forth, because
Yeah.
we can't fix something we don't know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is a good point. And aggressive, I'm trying to remember now.
Aggressive is exceeding the speed limit, running traffic signals or stop sign. Let's see, reckless driving.
Is that a box that can be checked on the form? In Idaho?
Yeah.
Reckless driving? Okay.
And I think there's one other category, but it's,
Road rage.
Lane changes?
Oh, not road rage.
what?
Road rage isn't a part of aggressive driving.
No,
It's-
no.
Yeah.
But you run into a case where impaired sometimes is also aggressive driving, or they're aggressive and impaired both.
Yeah, and so, point being that aggressive,
At an intersection,
Each
or off
state
the road.
each state tends to have a different definition sometimes of what elements they choose to make up their definition of aggressive driving. It sounds like from, Jim's explanation there, that's the elements that form aggressive driving in Idaho. All right, and then looking here about, I wanted to just show, these are the common crash attributes for the state of Idaho on the left, and then in this region on the right. And that's distracted driving did pop up on the statewide list. The only one that's not common, you can see the 2 that are not highlighted. The 4 that are highlighted are identical, maybe in a different order. These actually are the top 5 ranked in each of those lists there, but not the, yeah, so you can see they're not in the exact same order, but we are seeing the same types of crashes. I'd just rather make it very hard for you to follow. I guess you're not following me, the camera, so okay. I won't work so hard to stay one put. Or maybe I should work harder. Any thoughts here? What do you see? You can see the things we talked about. Unrestrained popped up, which wasn't in the top 3 that we talked about before. So having drivers who aren't buckled is a pretty major factor, not in whether a crash occurs, but in the severity of that crash. Right? You don't cause a crash by not having your seatbelt on, but if you're in a crash, that has a big impact on how severe that crash may be.
Well, in my view, I'm not surprised unrestrained driving is up there statewide because a lot of our communities are rural in nature. And usually in a lot of cases, especially in more rural communities, you probably have people driving in the back in a pickup truck with people in the back to get in a crash. There's no safety harness because pickup trucks, they fly right off. They fly off the truck.
Right, yeah, that would be another example of unrestrained, absolutely. Very good.
Yeah, as far as Idaho goes, Ada and Canyon County are probably 2 of the highest counties for seatbelt for restraint use. So compared to the rest of the state, this area has a lot higher usage.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it still shows up in the top 5 of contributors or attributes that are related to fatal crashes. And I'll have an example of kind of that overrepresentation here in a minute and from another state that I'm familiar with. Yeah, other thoughts? Please.
Unrestrained and run off the road together are part of suicide. That single vehicle suicides are done that way. Dennis Peck did studies of that about 20 years ago.
Yeah, purposely running straight into a tree or straight
Yes.
into a wall or a
Bridge
bridge.
abutments.
Bridge abutment, yeah. One thing that tends to happen is, and I have to admit, I don't know the details of Iowa laws, but a number of states will, if it's investigated and identified to be a suicide, it'll actually come out of this list. Like it would actually be considered not a traffic fatality, it would be considered a suicide using traffics. Is that, I'm getting a nod from Brent, so I think that's the way that it's handled.
Yeah, it comes out, if it's determined to be a suicide, it'll come out of our.
Now, they don't always know, right?
He
Again, if
doesn't
there's,
even know the tendency is to not call it a suicide, so collecting on the insurance is,
Well, in the runoff road, statewide, if you, there's only one highway going up north, and it's very curvy.
absolutely.
So, and most of the roads up there in central and north Idaho are very curvy, so that could be why that one's so high.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think we'll talk about curves here in a minute, but that's a great point, Terry.
The intersection related being an Ada and Canyon County characteristic is not surprising, because we have so many more intersections, and we have somebody coming at those intersections.
Yeah.
As you can drive for miles out in the country and other counties particularly, and few intersections and nobody there. You know?
Yeah, even if you blow a stop sign in the middle of nowhere, you're unlikely to get hit.
Right.
Yeah.
Your exposure goes way up.
Yes, please.
I read a book once that speculated that a lot of the crashes have unknown cause, where it's, one driver in the car. It was because maybe a bee or a fly or something had gotten into the car and got it to go like this and went off the road and ran into something. And then the bee flies away and nobody knows.
Yeah, you can't know for sure. So you're right. Yeah, sometimes those single occupant, especially run off the road, single occupant run off road crashes tend to have a little more mystery to them for exactly that reason. There's no one that's witnessed it that can tell the story, right? So they're piecing together the evidence as they have it at the scene, but it doesn't include really any corroboration from anyone who saw it occur. So.
A lot of our runoff road in Idaho are single driver, unrestrained, maybe impaired, and aggressive.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all a piece of the category.
Yeah.
And the larger pickups in Idaho don't have to comply with the seatbelt law. We got a secondary seatbelt law.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, so it's, Amy mentioned my background's from Missouri. Missouri also has a secondary seatbelt
Yes, I
law.
know.
And has very large pickups as well. With
But
yeah, there are some counties in the state of Missouri that have seatbelt use rates less than 20%. So it's a significant issue and kind of just the biggest benefit, like the simplest thing that someone could do, yet lots of reasons that folks choose not to do so.
Do you consider inattentive driving and distracted driving the same? Because inattentive driving is a ticket you can get here in Idaho.
Yeah, I don't think inattentive is let me say it, it's like, do I consider that, or is it? It's not officially deemed a distracted driving crash if it's inattentive, unless I'm gonna wait to get I'm getting a shrug and a half nod. That's good enough. So I'll go with that. Yeah, and the reason I'm kind of waffling on these is because every state does handle some of these definitions a little bit different. And because I'm not from the state, I'm not quite as intimately familiar as the back row is on this particular topic. So I feel free to jump out, guys, if you have any help for me on that. Yeah, but the definitions matter, right? They are important to know. Yeah, because if somebody just is inattentive for whatever reason, is that the classic definition of distracted in my brain is like, oh, somebody's texting or somebody's on a cell phone or somebody's reaching back to their kid or somebody. There's something very kind of specific you can name as a distraction, where inattentive could be kind of anything. But it's a good point because when you think about even the definition of the words, they're fairly similar, right?
Yeah, because they give out those tickets a lot here. I mean, just a month or two ago on the interstate, right here, Meridian exit, a lady caused a big, huge pileup, shut the freeway down for 5 hours in the morning, multiple car. She got a $68 inattentive driving ticket. Multiple cars. Another lady had to be cut out of her car. She got a $68 ticket for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So, kind of with that exercise we walked through, when you saw the randomness of the locations, and you you saw the somewhat predictability of the types of crashes. One thing that we have discovered kind of over the years as safety engineers and have started to apply, at least especially over the last decade or so, is to try to focus on the things that are predictable. And so instead of, at the kind of the beginning of this idea of safety engineering, or how do we go address crashes, we just spend a lot of time with pin maps and a lot of time going to the locations that have had crashes and trying to fix those locations. And what we found over time is that we would potentially fix that location, but then the crash would happen somewhere else. And we would spend our limited funds on a pretty small number of locations because funding is limited, and we wouldn't see the overall number of fatalities going down significantly. But what's happened as we've tried to broaden that and maybe focus more on these types of crashes and try to use lower cost solutions at a larger number of them, that we've been able to find that it's been a little bit better way to invest our funds. So focusing on the predictable is basically saying how can we be most efficient with the limited funding we have in safety? And then kind of drop back and say a little more philosophically, what are we trying to do then as safety engineers? Well, we're kind of trying to predict the future here. We're trying to identify where would future crashes happen and what kind of crashes might they be? And then what can we do to try to intervene and change that potential future? So if we say, hey, we had 35 fatalities last year here in this region, if we do nothing, we can expect to have roughly 35 fatalities next year, and we can expect them to be of these types. You know, we know about how or why they're going to happen. We really don't know where they're going to happen, as the pin map kind of showed us before, but we do know how they might happen. So that gives us some information to lead us to particular treatments. Now, pause for a second. There are bad locations that have a lot of crashes. And sometimes a bad location with a lot of crashes, even if they're mostly minor crashes, maybe they're just property damage or maybe they have some minor injuries, sometimes those can lead to, or those can give us clues of locations that could be severe crashes down the road. So there is still a potential or a need for going to some bad spot locations and fixing them. The contention here is that instead of going to 50 or 100 of those, that we think that we can, maybe there's only 8 or 10 of those, and then that next chunk of money could be spent on a wider kind of low-cost blanketing approach on some other types. Any thoughts on that, questions? All right. As we look overall, let me kind of caveat this information here. This is a national study looking at severe crashes. Back up, looking at all crashes. Actually, this is actually a very old Venn diagram from the 70s. But it's been recreated and used in a lot of different items, including the Highway Safety Manual in 2010. I'm actually working on a project to develop a Venn diagram like this for a little county called Clackamas County, Oregon, south of Portland, to try to do it again. I'm realizing it's really hard, which is helping me realize why they haven't updated it yet, because it is kind of tricky. But what we've determined is this, is if you look at those 3 circles, you can see that the drivers are a factor in 93% of the crashes. Driver is either the only factor in 57%, or some combination of those. So for example, driver and roadway factors combined, those are factors in 27% of crashes. Drivers and then the vehicle, like some kind of a vehicle problem, a flat tire, a vehicle malfunction of some sort. The only vehicle malfunction only happens 3% of the time. The vehicle malfunction is a factor in crashes about 13% of the time. And then this combination there, you can see a driver plus vehicle is 6. So is this any questions about kind of what this Venn diagram is trying to say? And then the one in the middle, 3% of the time, all 3 of those factors occur. This kind of makes sense graphically what we're looking at. So the 3 big numbers that stand out are vehicle factors, vehicle issues are a part of 13% of crashes that occur. Roadway factors, something that maybe we feel is kind of directly within our control as engineers, is a factor about 1/3 of the time. Driver factors, human behavior stuff that I heard about as we started to talk, almost every crash has some kind of a driver behavior, driver choice, or the driver is a factor in those crashes. So sometimes that leads us to a little bit of pessimism, like, well, what the heck are we going to do? You can't fix stupid, or people are just bad drivers, and so what are we going to do about that? But we've also identified things that we can do to help drivers and the potential mistakes they might make. So how can we do it? How can we actually try to make a difference or deal with this, one of the first things we do is we try to find clues. We try to find overrepresentation. In some cases, it's kind of a like a Sherlock Holmes kind of experience. We're really trying to investigate what we can find out about the crashes that do occur and how we can potentially address them. So we're going to talk about the behavioral one first. I'm not going to dive into that too much, partially because I'm not a behavioral expert per se. I'm going to talk more about the engineering and some of the infrastructure type solutions. I did want to mention this because I think it is important, especially given the fact that 93% of the crashes involve some kind of a human element. This is an example. This actually is not from Idaho. This is a Missouri example of observed usage of seatbelt use. And then I'm going to kind of point down to folks that are unrestrained whenever they are in a fatality. So in Missouri, whenever they do observations, so they go out and do studies every year, and they observe how many people are wearing their seatbelt. It's pretty rigorous, it's scientifically based, and we actually can feel fairly comfortable about the numbers. In the state of Missouri, in this year, which is 4 or 5 years ago now, they had 77% usage, which is relatively low. The national average is actually close to 90 now. It's between 85 and 90%. Missouri, like Idaho, has a secondary seatbelt law. That means 23% of drivers are not wearing their seatbelt. What we find from the crash data tells us that 68% of people who are killed in crashes are unbelted. So there's this overrepresentation of less than a quarter of the people are not wearing their seatbelt, but these same people who are not wearing their seatbelt are involved in more than 2/3 of the crashes. And to me, that's a clue. It's like, what the heck? That's a clue, right? There's something going on here, and so I need to find out what's with these people, right? What is with this 23%? And these numbers, in some states, I live in Seattle now. In Washington State, the numbers are a little bit almost more drastic in that Washington State has 93% seatbelt use, right? So almost everybody wears a seatbelt. So 7% of the people are not wearing their seatbelt. But of that 7%, still almost 50% of fatalities are unbelted. So you got this little subset of folks who are not wearing their seatbelt, and they're involved in almost half the fatalities. Or here, you've got less than a quarter, right? This little pie piece, and they're involved in more than 2/3, or they are the people who get killed in more than 2/3 of the fatalities. So you start asking questions. One is that seatbelts are really important, right? So if you wear a seatbelt and you're in a crash, you're unlikely to get killed because most of the time they don't. The other questions though would be, okay, is there more we can know about this piece of the pie? What about these people who choose not to wear a seatbelt? Are they also choosing to do other things? Do they also choose to drive aggressively? Do they also choose maybe to drive impaired? Are they making the same thought process that would maybe have someone not wear a seatbelt? Might that be a similar thought process that leads them to choose some other risky behavior? I don't know. We don't know the answer. We can find out sometimes by looking at these crashes and determining, were they also speeding? Were they also impaired? Can we make some combinations? And sometimes you can find out more about that. Sometimes it's more of a kind of a psychological thing. We can't know exactly what they're thinking. But as we get into the state like Washington's even more, this is such a small subset, right? It's like 5 to 7% of the population are the people getting killed in almost half the fatals. There's some, you can't convince 100% of the people to wear their seatbelt, right? Some people will do it, they're just not ever going to do it for a variety of reasons. But we find that a number of them are also those that tend to be involved in other risky behaviors behind the wheel. But here's the good news. Even though a lot of this stuff is human related, there's things that we can do. There's things that we can do as engineers or as safety professionals on the infrastructure side to do two things. One is to try to reduce the mistakes that are made. There's things we can do to try to help people see stop signs better, to try to help them stop at the red light and the signal, to help them from running off the road by providing some treatments. We'll talk about some of those. And if they do make a mistake, we can help that mistake not cost them their life. There used to be kind of this philosophy from what I understand, I was a child, in the 70s and the early 80s of, I, as a traffic engineer, I'm taking care of my highway, right? I'm designing the highway to be as safe as it can be. But once somebody leaves my highway, they're kind of on their own. It's like they're the ones who made the mistake to go off the roadway. And so once they leave the roadway, they're not highway. And if they're stupid enough to go off my highway, then forget them. They can, they're not mine. That's actually changed quite a bit. I'd say especially in the last, I'd say not the last 20 or 30 years, we've really thought more about the roadside. How can we make the roadside more forgiving? What can we do that if somebody does run off the road to get them back on the road more easily? How can we help them even if they run off the road, even if someone makes a mistake? Because I don't think anybody in the room has not made a mistake on the roadway. How can we help that mistake not have, or have at least the least severe ramifications? So that's kind of where we're headed, is what can we do to reduce the mistakes? What can we do to make the mistakes not have to cost so much? So that hopefully that person makes a better decision or can correct that mistake the next time. They have the opportunity to do that because they're not permanently injured or killed in that crash. So we're going to look at a few of those. The first ones are, maybe before that, any questions thus far? This is kind of a lot of kind of higher level stuff.
Well, then,
Please.
I wonder whether there's also, I'm sure you have data, on both time of day and time of week. So are we seeing crashes, fatalities in the peak or the off-peak?
Yeah, that's a good question. So nationally, the fatality rates tend to be higher overnight, mainly because these high-risk behaviors are overnight. People are less likely. There's been some seatbelt studies done at night using, infrared or whatever, and they found that people are less likely to buckle up at night. Significantly a higher percentage of impaired driving at night, as you would guess. So the speeds tend to be higher just because it's like this combination. It's kind of a perfect storm. So the rates are higher. Now the actual number of fatalities tends to be fairly even or ish, or even there's maybe more during the day just because there's so much more traffic, right? So many more people on the roads. Overall crashes tend to be in the peaks. So you have more crashes in that morning peak, evening peak. It's because there's more cars on the road, so you have more opportunity to have a crash just because there's more cars to have the crash. And there's more opportunity for them to bump into each other because they're all on the road at the same time. And we talk about the peak hours. People are either in a hurry to get to work because they're going to be late, or they get their kids to school or whatever, or they're in a hurry to get home because they're finally off work and they want to get to the next thing, or they're getting their kids to soccer or whatever. So you tend to have not only more cars, but people who are kind of in like more stressful situations than somebody driving at 10 a.m. or somebody driving at 8 p.m. Typically, these all, of course, are kind of generalizations, but that's a good point. Yeah, we'll talk about some of the things that specifically happen at night. Night's different. And the one thing that's interesting about night, too, is that the people who know the most about nighttime aren't us, aren't engineers, I was a government employee for 10 years. I worked some nights and weekends, but not that many. I mostly worked a 9 to 5 type day. And even though I did a lot of morning peak and evening peak work, especially at things like traffic signals, I wasn't out on the roads at 11 p.m. for my job. But I knew who it was, is police officers and maintenance staff. And these folks know a lot about what's going on the roadways, especially in those weird hours, in the overnight hours, in the weekend hours, that a typical government week doesn't fit into. So that's important stuff to know too. So again, it's all part of this investigation, right? Of what data can we collect to know what's going on at these locations, know what kind of crashes are happening, when and where, so that we can address them. All right. So looking at some engineering solutions on the intersection side, they can start out with very, very inexpensive, even like in this case, this is what you see here, just a typical stop sign that has a red retroreflective strip on the pole. The first ones of these that I started to hear about, and we started to use back in Missouri 8 or 10 years ago, we had a sign production center, and we literally had like scrap. We had, we recycled our signs because they're made of aluminum. So we had recycled aluminum, sometimes in just kind of scrap pieces. And then we had extra sign sheeting that just kind of came off, it was just kind of in a pile of the extras that you ended up after you made your real signs. And started thinking about, we didn't invent this idea, but as we started to hear about this happening, we were able to use some of our recycled materials to basically make some of these for free and start putting them on both stop signs and also like yellow warning signs. So a curve ahead sign, the chevron signs that you see around the curve, things like that. And what this does is it can give you more what we call target value. So it gives you more square inches of red for somebody to see as they're approaching that sign. It also ties that sign to the ground, like visually. So you see a stop sign, then you actually see the post going to the ground. and just gives drivers, if only subconsciously, additional information about, hey, there's a stop sign here that you might want to stop at, or we would encourage you to stop at, or it's illegal for you not to. But we want to be sure that they can see it. And so doing things like this, both at stop signs, very kind of subtle, simple way to make a change. They're actually still working on research. In fact, I'm part of a project right now with the Federal Highway Administration to look at, we call them full post chevrons. So those yellow signs that go around the curve, putting a yellow strip on the post and seeing, does that provide additional benefit? It may be very small, but even if it provides a small incremental benefit, it's such a low cost addition, both to existing signs, because you can just slap it on there, or even could it become, or should it become the new standard for warning signs, and maybe even stop signs, to also have this kind of post retroreflector as well. Yeah, Terry.
In an older neighborhood with a lot of trees, it might be all you see coming up on the thing.
Yeah, it can help with cover. Yeah, when signs get covered, that's definitely an issue. That's a good point. The other thing, when you talked about trees, this is not, you can't really see because of this one, but once you get to spring and summer here, there's going to be a lot of green behind that sign, right? A lot of dark green. In the fall, it's going to be a lot of red and orange and yellow. And there definitely are times that during the day, the sign can kind of get lost behind the background, especially for people that might have a color vision deficiency, which I actually have. So I confuse red and green and brown and other colors. Some, I say sometimes all the time. It's just the way my eyes are. And so, kind of a funny story, right? I'm a traffic engineer who can't tell red from green. But it's actually become pretty beneficial, right? Because I can kind of see through what, 4 or 5% of the population have some kind of vision deficiency. And they're pretty varied. There's a lot of different ways. There's a very small part of the population who doesn't see color at all. That's extremely rare. But a lot of people have some kind of identification problem where they can't see the shades of things and things blend together. And so that's what happens sometimes for me, both with mostly older signs. So once the stop sign becomes about 8 or 10 years old, it starts to look pretty worn and a little more pink than red. Or when you get to some your yellow signs that start to really fade into yellow, and they're not very shiny or reflective anymore, but they're still yellow, and then you've got trees and stuff behind them, those can get lost behind. So we have a number of things like this to fix those. There's fluorescent yellow sign sheeting now that's a lot brighter. It actually pops even during the day and shows up brighter than a standard yellow sign. So there's a number of, point being here, a number of very low cost solutions in the signing world that can provide some significant benefits. And even if this sort of provides, say, a 3 to 5% reduction in people running through the stop sign at 1,000 locations, you're probably going to save a life or two over the next decade, right? Or you're going to, and it's such a low cost to do something like this that we got to look at kind of the aggregate, look at the long-term effects over a lot of locations. That's the idea behind these very low-cost solutions. Jim?
There's a research project to look at post-retro reflectivity nationally, but it hadn't been funded yet.
Okay, very good. Is that on stop signs specifically, or?
No, on all signing.
Okay.
You have railroad crossings, you have warning signs, and you have regulatory signs, so
Yeah.
all of them.
Yeah, we're doing a small scale one with Federal Highway, as I mentioned, on chevrons specifically. We did a lot of chevron posts back in the late 2000s in Missouri. Iowa has some, Minnesota has quite a few, and we're going to have some installed as part of this project. So, of course, it's the beginning of the research project, so, once my hair is totally gone gray, we'll actually have the results of that study, because they tend to take a while. But I think in a couple of years, we'll have some significant after results. And then looking at the ones, we've had some that have been installed for quite a while, so we even have some decent after data already on those. So we'll be looking at that in the next few months. Traffic signals. Man, we drove through a lot of traffic signals. Terry and I spent some time together this afternoon, and I think I drove every signal in the county almost. I'm sure that's not true, but we drove a lot of them. So some things about signals that, again, I'm looking at this low-cost idea of backplates behind the signal, so that you have a little, instead of it just being, these have backplates behind them, it's kind of a black rectangle that goes around. There's also retroreflective backplates that give you a reflective, most cases.
There's a couple of them.
White, you guys have some of those?
I've got a couple.
Yeah, those can be really helpful at night. It can be helpful with anyone who has any kind of vision deficiency, especially at night, because it shows you that this is actually a traffic signal, not that it's just some light that gets washed out. In some cases, it can get washed out because it's very dark. In some cases it can get washed out because it's too bright. You've got a lot of either parking lot lighting, or other ambient lighting from businesses behind. The colorblind thing comes up again, is that if folks have trouble telling the red from the green, having a rectangle there that shows, oh, the top light is lit up, that must be the red light, because that's red is always on top. It just gives additional information. And kind of what we find is that anything that helps either color deficient or other visual deficient users helps everybody, right? There's not a downside to others by helping out those drivers as well. Some lane use signing here, which is those arrows in each of the lanes. Having a signal head for every lane is valuable, because every driver kind of is, I'm in my lane, I look up, I see the signal that's right lined up with my lane, I know what I'm supposed to do. There's a number of cities around the country. Actually, this looks like a Boise signal. I mean, you guys do pretty much all this stuff. You know, you guys, your standard, I think, is pretty much on the level here. Street name signs. Your street name signs are awesome here. Really big.
Left-hand traffic signals are very important at major intersections too.
Oh yeah, this is a good point. I didn't show that for tonight. I had one having kind of a far side to the left signal, in case you're coming around a curve especially, or even if you have a big truck in front of you, so you have additional.
Well, if you have a 6 or 7 lane approach, like it helps those left turners to have a signal over on the left.
And I know I saw one of those, Terry, where I'm in the left turn and I've got like a flashing yellow arrow, permissive, and then I know I've got another one, like a one way over here on the left as well.
Terry does a good job.
It looks like there is one there for the other direction.
Yeah, I think there is one.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that is a left mounted for this cross street over here.
I think we just encourage people to run the red light, because I see more people run turn lights than going straight.
Yeah, you think because they can see, because they have more information about it?
Yeah, they can see, they can still make it. And because you'll see 4 or 5 cars running turn lights, especially
that's just because it's not enforced.
Exactly.
They can get away with it, so they do it.
People also get the feeling I waited for this light, now I'm entitled to go through it.
Yeah.
Just because it turns red, I did my waiting, it's time for me to go through.
Yeah, especially if I already, I'm not going to wait twice, right? And there's an expectation, especially around here, and a lot of places, that I don't wait twice for a signal. It's my turn. You're right. I did my waiting. Now it's time for me to go. Even if I push the red, or even if I get through, it's my right almost to get to go through this. And if I have to wait twice, that's unacceptable. Yeah. Definitely a thought. And then I just had a thing. Some states aren't using flashing yellow arrow yet, or at least not very much. They're still using a green ball for that permissive left, which is, permissive left is, you can turn left, but you have to yield to the people coming at you. So around here, flashing yellow arrow is kind of standard, so I'm not going to belabor that point. But that's consistent with current research in the last 5 to 7 years of the flashing yellow arrow being a better indicator to indicate that to people. Because before, if I was in the left lane, I had a green ball. If I'm in the through lane, I have a green ball. The through lane, the green ball says I get to just go. I don't have to think about anybody. If I'm in the left lane, left turn lane, the green ball says, you get to go, but not if there's somebody coming. So we're using the same, we used to use the same indication in 2 different lanes for 2 different drivers, but it had 2 different messages. So then we would add this sign that says, left turn, yield on green ball, right? You guys have seen those, used to have those, I think. It's still Terry talked about some doghouse signals, which is that, 1 and then 2 and 2. They still have that. So those are getting phased out around the country. Some states faster than others, some localities faster than others. But it really is. The other thing is this: permissive left turns are still difficult, and there's still you're expecting somebody to judge a car coming straight at them, which is really hard to do. Just our brains have a hard time interpreting. Anything coming right at us. It's like a depth perception issue. It's very hard to tell what speed that is, and particularly hard for 2 types of motorists. One is older drivers. Because for whatever reason, something in their brain is harder for them to see that. But the other one is younger drivers. There's a part of, I just learned this fairly recently, until about 18, 19 or so, a young person's brain hasn't fully developed their depth perception, which is weird, but it's from what I understand, it's true. And so then being able to judge an oncoming vehicle at 16 is actually much more difficult. Their brain just isn't wired to do that yet until they hit 18, 19, 20. So one reason that we tend to see, there's lots of reasons that young drivers get more crashes. But one reason is that it really is not only just because they're more aggressive and because they have 6 kids in the car, but part of it is their brain just isn't quite ready for some of the actions that they need to make on the roadways, like a permissive left turn where they have to judge traffic. So, tidbit of the day, I guess, for one of them. Any other thoughts on signals? Yeah, Terry.
Just on the flashing yellow arrow, there's operational issues there too. We've gone to a 5-second delay or so before it comes on. So the other traffic coming at you has already started. So the person's less likely to make that instant response and go.
Oh, interesting.
And it gives the pedestrians a leg up too to get out there.
So you're delaying your left, you're delaying all your left turners or your permissive lefts?
All the permissive when they come on.
So any permissive left turner, they don't get their flashing yellow arrow until after the throughs opposing them, and pedestrians get their green or get their walk.
In just a set time.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah.
There's also intersections that the permissive is turned off during certain hours.
Yeah.
Right, this is true.
Schools, crossings, or really congested areas where there's just no gaps.
Yeah, oh yeah, because here's one more thing about permissive that's problematic, is I'm in the left turn lane, I'm trying to turn left, I have a permissive flashing yellow arrow. My focus is on what? My focus is on 2 things probably, this flashing yellow arrow, because it's going to go solid yellow pretty soon, and then I'm going to have to make a decision on what to do. But then the cars in front of me, right, that are coming at me that I'm trying to find a gap to get through them. What am I not thinking about? I don't really think about the pedestrians on my left that I'm getting ready to hit because I'm focused on the signal and I'm focused on these people. Both of those are within my cone. There's this cone of vision thing that we won't get into too much tonight. But the cone of vision is pretty narrow for your like focused attention. I mean, it's really right here. Like, I can't see Amy right now, right? Like, I know she's there and I can kind of see like a blue blob, no offense. But I couldn't actually pick her out because our peripheral vision is really pretty bad as humans. The things that we focus on here, having a pedestrian over here is just not on the radar. It's not on our brain's radar. So there can be conflicts here. So what Terry brought up was there can be times a day, like when school lets out, that the county will not use the permissive part. It'll only have a protected green. Whenever there's a protected green left turn, the pedestrians don't walk. They don't need to go, right? Because you have a protected left turn. And just the signal operates.
They can go, they just don't have the signal to go.
They can't go legally. Yeah, not to say they're not going to go anywhere.
We're talking about school kids now.
Yeah, this is back to the human behavior, right? The 93%. All right. Whoa. And then getting into, of course, some bigger issues or bigger potential solutions. This is a roundabout, of course, of which you guys have a few here in the region. Terry and I drove at least 3, I think, today. Particularly useful. I don't know, we get into a whole lot of detail about roundabouts. Here's the things about roundabouts. Severe crashes go down 90%. So your fatals and your severe injuries go down 90% when you put in a roundabout at a location that's had a history of crashes. When you do have a crash, which tend to be fairly rare, and the main reason that they tend to be fairly rare is because your entering speeds and your circulating speeds are very low. In most cases, they're between 10 and 20 miles per hour. And the reason that they're low isn't because we put a sign that says, hey, don't drive over 20. It's because we designed this thing in such a way that you really can't go much faster than that without feeling really uncomfortable. I'm going to try to use the laser maybe, or not.
Are the vehicles in there parked? In a,
you know what, this is during construction. Yeah, I apologize. This is actually not the best photo to use. No, these guys are still in construction. They're in the truck apron there. And you can see we don't even have the full striping. So now that I blow this up on a big screen, I'm like, oh, this wasn't a very good photo. So yeah, this isn't a full, there should actually be striping more in between those lanes. Because this is actually a 2-lane roundabouts. Yeah, I apologize for this is a kind of a lousy example here. But I did want to show this deflection. So as somebody's coming up this and going, I'm going to try, no, maybe I should have hit a button. I don't have a laser. Do I have a laser? Show me which one it is. Oh, all right. I'm colorblind, see, I didn't see it. All right, we're back. Okay, that's what I was saying. So as the vehicles theoretically is coming up this direction, even if they're going, say, 35 or 40, at this point, they kind of have to slow down to make this curve. We put a curve in there on purpose in this case because we're trying to slow them down. We're creating deflection. So we create this kind of, you got to be deflected this way, and then you're going to go around. So even if you're going straight, you can't go straight, right? There's a big circle in the middle, so you've got to go around this way and then do your movement. And the way that these splitter islands, which is what these guys are, the way these splitter islands are designed is very purposeful for that deflection, to get people to deflect so that you can get that speed reduction. That's the key of a roundabout, is get deflection so you can reduce the speeds. Once you reduce the speeds, people can look each other in the eye, which is crazy, I know, but we actually like people to do that when they drive sometimes, so that they can, one, see each other and kind of see what's going on. But, and then there really is, you don't see the signs here, but there is, as you all know, I don't have to teach you about roundabouts because you have them, but yield control here. So these are supposed to yield, the people in the circle have the right of way. But even if somebody makes a mistake, even if somebody stops in the circle to let somebody out, which they should never do, but they do all the time, that they can at least have that eye contact moment where they say, don't stop in the circle, that's not, okay, I'll go. Like you get to have that, and even though there's a frustration with that, nobody gets hurt in that, right? And even if there is a crash, they're gonna hit each other at such this kind of flat angle that they're gonna bump bumpers or they're gonna bump themselves together, but nobody's gonna get hurt in that crash. They just typically don't. That's not to say there's never been a fatal at a roundabout. There are sometimes. Usually severe crashes at roundabouts or somebody who doesn't know that it's even there for whatever reason, they're impaired or otherwise, and they just drive right into it. And they flip their car, or they flip their motorcycle, or they land in something in the middle, and they get themselves hurt or killed. But for the most part, roundabouts, I belabor it a little because they're really, really good. And not only are they great for safety, they're great for traffic operations. The flow of traffic through a roundabout is pretty incredible in the vast majority of cases. And they just, good for emissions, good for aesthetics. There's a lot of good things about them. The life cycle costs of roundabouts are pretty great because you're not paying for any you are paying for lighting, so you need to light them. You're not paying for signals, you're not paying for the signal controller stuff, and you're not having to update that every 5 to 7 years. You're not out there retiming the signal every couple of years to make sure that it's still handling the traffic correctly. Because guess what, the roundabout's still handling the traffic just fine. All right, enough of the roundabout soapbox. Questions, comments? Everyone doesn't like them, so we gotta talk about roundabouts. Yes?
Well, I was just gonna say, in my town, we actually, and, Jamie probably knows more about this, but they were talking about putting in a roundabout. Right now, it's a signalized intersection, and there's a school right next to it. And they were talking about taking out the signalized intersection and putting in a roundabout, and people protested it because they didn't see whether or not it, all the engineers were telling us how much safer it would be for the kids, but we just couldn't see it, and I think they backed up on that now.
Yeah, it's hard to see if you haven't driven it because it feels goofy. Everybody has, if you're of any age at all, has Chevy Chase in European vacation, driving in circles and circles and circles around wherever he was in France or something around that. That's kind of the idea, is this big traffic circle that's just, and so I think that is definitely taken the last 10 or 15 years, 20 years to try to get that picture out of people's minds and start to kind of show what these things really can do. And yeah, the data's there. So the data shows that they're extremely beneficial and useful. But you're right, it does take, and I mean, fortunately there's some around here, so at least there's some close enough that you can start to take a look at them and see them.
I drive them every day. It does work.
Significantly safer than a signal. I would love to have one anywhere close to my kids' high school, versus having a traffic signal there.
This is a bad picture because there's no development.
It is a bad picture, yeah.
And so it's like you don't have crosswalks. And, the issue is if you do have lots of activity and there's the need to get people across, you gotta have then pedestrian activated crosswalks before the roundabout, so you do end up having at least the maintenance costs of the signals.
So what can happen,
And you stop traffic.
And you're right, this is a rural,
Right.
No pedestrian traffic, no sidewalks even, so envision with me for a second that you do have sidewalks. The sidewalk comes here, goes along here, and then the crossings happen back here. So you have a crossing here to here if you need to cross. And the value of this crossing, one of the things about it is you just cross one direction at a time. And in a typical situation, especially with a one-lane roundabout, if you have it well signed and you have a crosswalk, we haven't seen any significant issues in most cases with without having even activated with rectangular flashing beacons like you have around here with a hawk or something. There is some discussion at multi-lane roundabouts, this is what you're saying, is that if you have multi-lanes and you have significant traffic, say, going this way, and you have significant pedestrian activity, you may want something more activated there, so that to be sure the pedestrians are seen. So yeah, that's a good point. And that would come with it, yeah, some maintenance cost of signing in the rectangular beacon and power drop or solar. Other thoughts? All right. This is one I meant to ask you about this one today, Terry. Have you guys done any median U-turns? Is this familiar to anybody?
Yes.
We have one planned
All right.
at Veterans and State Street.
So let me pitch this. This is a high-speed expressway. I don't know what speed you guys go up to, but in the states I'm most familiar with, speeds on these can go up to, speed limits can go up to 70 miles per hour, even with that great intersection. And I know Texas has some that are 70, Missouri has some that got up to 65. If you pull straight out, so I wish I would have done it before after here. So this is a typical expressway where you could drive across or you could drive here and turn left. If you pull out and get hit, I mean, that's the worst kind of crash, right? They're driving 65 or 70. Remember, that's the speed limit. So the speed limit of 70, how fast are people really driving? You know, potentially 75, 80 plus. And someone pulls out and you get hit at 80. You know, most of those are not survivable type of crashes. What a median U-turn does is it identifies locations like this that have a very high risk of very severe crashes, like a high-speed expressway intersection. And it changes it, basically changes the way that you maneuver this intersection so that we avoid those angle crashes. Here's what happens. If I want to go straight, instead of going straight, which I can't do because there's a median here, I'm going to turn right, merge left, make a U-turn somewhere down the road, and this could be a while, this could be a little ways. Come back, merge right, and then take a right to go straight. In doing so, no angle crashes, right? You've got merging crashes potentially, you've got some lane changes, you've got some complication there, but you're not going to get broadsided like this at 80 miles per hour by a semi.
Except pulling out from the stop sign.
Yeah, it's gonna get rear-ended.
Yeah, you could potentially get rear-ended here,
No,
right?
you
You make
get
this
hit
right
by the
turn.
one coming from the left
Yeah, when you're merging,
when you're merging.
twice.
Yeah, it's not a.
Yeah, you
People
could go-
Right, but here's what you're not doing. You're not putting yourself broadside across two lanes
No, you're
when they're
putting
coming
it
in
at
and
an
against
angle.
two more. But no, point taken. This is not, we're not reducing crashes by 100% with this solution, right? We're swapping out types. We're swapping out conflicts from angle conflicts to merging potential rear end conflicts. I just had a crash about a month ago now. My car was in the shop where we got rear-ended, and it felt pretty bad. Nobody, my wife and I were in the car. Neither of us were injured. All four cars everybody was buckled up, so it made things pretty simple and awesome in that respect. Nobody got hurt. But it definitely was jarring. It was a pretty minor, we were actually in congestion. The guy was probably driving 15 or 20 when he hit us. He didn't hit the brakes until after he hit us. I knew that. We actually had three. We got hit, and then we hit, and then we got hit again in the back. But here's the deal. Cars are made for that, right? That's exactly the strongest part of your car is the front of your car and the back of your car in terms of a crash. The airbags are there for front impacts. Your bumper is super strong in the back for rear impacts. The crumple zones are made almost, not exclusively, the best way to get hit in a crash, honestly, is to get hit in the rear, because that's, your head's going to hit your headrest, your airbags are going to potentially go off if you have a front hit, and your car's just designed for that. So again, back to this idea of your car's not designed to get hit at 80 miles per hour in the side door, especially the driver's side if you're the only person in the car. That said, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? You got to weave, you got to go. If you want to turn left, it's a little simpler. You make your right, you weave over, you do your U-turn, and then you just keep going straight, right? You've made your left. It has adverse travel. I have to turn right to go left. People hate that. They just do. But we've done it, right? If you've ever driven a cloverleaf intersection where you are on the side, you're on the whatever, and then you take your ramp to go off, and what, go around this road, you know, I have to turn, I want to go that way, why would I turn right? So it's similar concept to that. Here's the other thing, if you kind of envision this for a second, go with me here for just a second. If you think about this as a really wide oval, it kind of acts just like a roundabout, right? If you think about how we just described a roundabout, you kind of turn right, you go around, and then you can make your left, or you do this. You're really doing the same thing. It's just like a really super long roundabout. So if you can convince folks, if you have a community or an area that roundabouts have been sold, you can kind of at least describe this in the same way as a roundabout. The one caveat, which actually helps a little bit with your turning, is that you can make this left turn into the side street. That's different. In some cases, that one can be removed too, and you can force people to make this U-turn to come down and go to on the side street, which makes it more like a true roundabout type design. I bring these up because they're kind of different. You know, of course, roundabouts aren't too different for you all because you have them at least in some of your communities. The median U-turns are a little bit more different, or a little bit more rare. But we have seen some significant, this is more of a, hey, I have a high crash location where people actually are getting killed. Like, where people are getting hurt and killed at a location. Because this isn't, you don't do 1,000 of these, right? This isn't a low cost. Although it actually is relatively low cost, because in most cases, you don't have to add right-of-way. You don't have to add pavement, you're just changing traffic control. So there is some work to be done, but it's not like you're building a new interchange, which sometimes is a solution for a very high-speed expressway crash problem. The interchanges are now 10, 15, 20 million bucks, where this can be done for, way less than that, of course. But yes?
Don't they also end up with faster traffic flow, because there's just not as many people stopping to turn, and you're getting the people who are turning out of the flow of traffic?
Yeah, I would say it's funny, so there's more weaving, but that's a good question. In terms of like turbulence in this area, I'd say it's maybe kind of a wash, maybe a little bit more even, because you've got all the weaving, but you don't have a situation. I mean, really what we're trying to get rid of here is people doing this, going across here, oops, sorry, as traffic is driving 70 or 80 the other way. I mean, that's really the key. So there is probably a little more, I wouldn't say stop and go, but kind of this turbulence of cars having to kind of see what each other is doing. But you don't have, also the other issue is I'm going here and then I'm turning left. That's a pretty major movement, because sometimes they're working so hard to not get hit here on the left that they don't notice the cars coming at them from the right as well. There's some states, Iowa has this problem. For some reason in Iowa, a lot of cars make this a one-stage movement. Like, they don't stop in the middle. Like, they feel like they just gotta go. They try to do the whole thing at one time. I don't know if it's just like a culture thing there, but it's, I never really learned it that way growing up in Missouri. I always was kind of trying to do it in two. But some people don't. So there's that issue too. Of that left turn can be a problem. Other questions? Yes, very bad.
So the place that ACHD has this designed for isn't a high speed.
Okay.
It's actually a high capacity intersection. Where the issue was is there was such a high left turn movement from the south to the west that it was trying to remove the left turn movements. There was actually two heavy left turn movements. It's river crossing. So it's trying to remove those two movements by taking to the median U-turn. And it also provides an opportunity to do a two-stage pedestrian crossing down near where the median U-turns are.
Okay.
So it's a much slower speed, but because it was river crossing.
Yeah, it's almost like an access management maybe would be the purpose.
Yeah, it's a modified median U-turn, but it has the same kind of left turn movement.
But kind of the same concept.
Like exactly the same, really. It's just those two left turn movements.
Yeah, very good. All right. I'm going to switch over from intersections to looking at corridors for a minute, just talking about a few solutions that way. The first one is similar to this, we looked at the stop sign, is there's a lot we can do with very low cost signing options. And this is looking at curves, which we mentioned earlier. Curves are definitely a major part of runoff road crashes, and they tend to happen to curves more often than they happen in straight or tangent sections. And so some things we talked about before are warning signs, chevron signs that go around the curve, arrow boards at that point as people are driving through the curves. The thing I love about the chevron sign, I can't not talk about this every time I give a presentation. the thing about the chevrons is that they're right there with you all the way through the curve, right? There aren't very many signs we have that stick with you all the way through. Most of the things we do in traffic control are, hey, warning, there's something up ahead you need to pay attention to, right? Like here, warning, there's a curve or a turn up ahead you need to pay attention to. Warning, there's a stop sign ahead. Warning, there's a signal ahead, right? So we're trying to warn somebody of something coming up with a single sign or maybe doubled up signs or something, but we're just giving it to them at one point in space, right? So what if they look down at their radio at that one like 2-second period that these signs are there? Well, they missed it, right? That happens sometimes. Especially now with all the distracted driving, it happens a lot. But if we can give them a series of signs taking them around the curve that shows them kind of how sharp the curve is, shows them that there is a curve they need to pay attention to, and gives them guidance, positive guidance around that curve to navigate it, then we've provided additional information to them all the way through the process. So that's my ode to the chevron sign. A couple other things here is they have these new signs that go right at the point of curvature. It's just a sign that was added a few years ago to the PTCD. You can add flashers to the signs. You can double up the signs. You can add what we call these speed plaques that give you some indication of a recommended safe speed around that curve. You can excuse me, oversize the signs to make them extra big. You can use fluorescent yellow sheeting, as I mentioned before, to make them brighter and shinier. A lot of things you can do. Pavement marking. You can add some kind of pavement marking to the roadway here to just give another piece of information. Again, these would be at locations where you've experienced some moderate to high level of crashes, but there's a bunch of them. So you're not going to spend $1 million a pop. You're going to spend, in this case, by contract, $4,000 or $5,000 a pop with your own forces, maybe a couple $1,000s or less per location, to address maybe hundreds of locations in your state, or maybe for you all dozens of locations in your region, instead of just the top 10 curves. You're going to get to go to 50 curves or 100 curves with a lower cost solution. All these have little downsides. Of course, anything you put on the pavement is going to get run over and it's going to wear out pretty fast. It's not going to work if it's snowing, right, because you can't see it. It's not going to show up all that well, even if it's raining, because it's going to not be seen as well. So there's some downsides to some of these too. These aren't, again, nothing's perfect. Chevrons, this kind of simple package here, chevrons, warning signs, we do see about a 20% reduction in curve crashes by doing some very basic signing and some sign improvements there, which is pretty, you think about reducing 20% of your crashes at 150 curves, well now you're getting some numbers that actually mean something. Yes?
One of the best things I've seen was on this one road I go on in Montana. They've got lighted solar chevrons. Like every second or third one flashes, the chevron itself is yellow and it's solar lighted LED, very bright.
Yeah.
So it's very visible day or night, and it really makes that curve pop.
Yeah.
I mean, really, and that seems like that'd be really easy because they're LED and they're solar.
There's another one they're using now called sequential flashing chevron. So it's actually a light, kind of the same thing, but it flashes, basically it's like a runway. It flashes them around the curve, and then it flashes them again. So it's like it's showing them to you as you go. They're fairly new, and it's really interesting because they're actually, they know each other. Like they know where the other signs are, if that makes sense. So even if you I saw this at a trade show recently, if you swap the order of two of the lights, or if you have to replace one with a new light, it talks to the other ones and automatically knows the right kind of sequence to go. So they're kind of like Christmas lights, almost like chasers. It's kind of chasing them around. Yeah, so again, just to provide additional information at locations where you may have a crash history, where you don't want to, you can't, it costs $1 million to fix the curve, or to try to straighten the curve. You may not even be able to straighten the curve if you have other limitations. So it's just providing additional information to try to reduce that type of crash. Yes?
What's the effect of those over time? I mean, all of these are going to have a novelty effect. They're going to slow people down. What happens over time? Do people get more used to it and conform better, or do they pay less attention?
Yeah, that's a good question. And both. Both tend to happen. In some cases, if it's truly a novelty, like I'd say some novelty example I would say would be, for a while we had these changeable message signs that were kind of using like the big black signs, and then you put something on that sign. Work zones use these a lot. And when they first started using these in work zones, it said slow down. They're kind of a novelty, like, oh, I've never seen this big huge black sign with the big yellow letters. That's interesting. That's new. It's flashing at me. In 1989 or 1993, that was really impactful. But by the time you started to see them all the time, it wasn't as impactful. what we find with these, I would say particularly the chevron signs again, is that because they're there all the way through, because they're, you know, they're with you all the time, they tend to hold their impact. The thing about curves though is the people who run off curves tend to be the people who live there and who do drive that curve every day. And so it does, any signing package kind of gets lost to them because they don't see the sign. Kind of like they don't even remember the name of the streets they turn on to get home. If they had to describe to somebody how to get to their house, you know, sometimes it's hard for them to remember. I know it is, sometimes it's for me. Being maybe in the middle, I've lived in Seattle for 5 years, so it's like I know how to get places, but I don't remember the names of the streets as well. Where, you know, places I lived my whole life growing up for 20 years, well, you know, I know more about them. But I think that's, yeah, it's a great point though. What we tend to do as researchers is we have a before condition, and then we have a point where we install the treatment, and then we have an after condition. What we tend to do most of the time is whatever calendar year we install the treatment, that entire calendar year gets thrown out of the analysis. So we put something in the summer of 2009, 2009 doesn't count. Like it kind of gets eliminated. So we do 5 years before and 5 years after, but not counting to try to not address that initial effect. And that's kind of part of it. Also because it's a lot easier to look at crash data an entire year at a time. So to try to plot just a few months of crash data and which ones go before and after. Right, you have to adjust, oh, this is 5 3/4 years and this is 5 1/4 year, and how do you, yeah, so there's a practical reason and a kind of a research methodology reason for that. All right, I'm going to keep moving here. Rumble strips, and this is actually a rumble stripe. So the thing about rumble strips, here's what they do. You're going down the street, you bump into this strip, it gives you an audible warning. It also gives you a tactile warning that you feel, and gives you information to say, hey, guess what? You're about to run off the road. A lot of freeways have had these for years and years on the shoulders. These are actually installed on an edge line. This is actually technically called a rumble stripe because part of the rumble is painted over with the pavement marking. And here's a couple advantages that that gives you. One is it allows you to get warned before, like earlier. I mean, this is a case where you don't really have much shoulder anyway. But if you have a situation where you had shoulder and maybe you used to use a shoulder rumble strip, using an edge line rumble strip gives you that information sooner. The other is that the way that the reason you can see this white stripe at night is because that stripe has a whole bunch of little bitty spherical beads in it. And those beads they're just glass beads. They're kind of almost like sand or salt about that size. And they're put into the paint. So whenever you're driving on the road and your lights hit those beads, because they're perfectly spherical, your light goes into the bead and it comes right back to the headlight. It's called retroreflection. If you have water on top and your light hits the water, the light actually bounces that way, right? Like the same angle that it hits, it goes. That's called reflection. Reflection's bad in traffic because we don't want things to reflect out to there. We want them to retroreflect right back to where they came from. What happens whenever there's rain is that rain covers up the stripe, right? So you don't get the retroreflection. So most of the time when you're driving on the road and it's raining, you can't see the pavement markings. Like they disappear. But they didn't disappear. They're just covered with a 1/4 inch of rain, so you can't see them. What happens here, though, is because the way these rumbles are designed, I don't know if you can see it, but they're basically milled in like this. So they're like kind of like a trough. And if I'm driving this way, the back side of that trough is kind of like, we call it a vertical face. It's also more like a diagonal face. But that vertical face often stays a little bit outside the water. And so you can actually, you get beads and you get that retroreflection from those beads that are in that vertical part. And so you actually can see this stripe at night in the rain. And it's kind of amazing, actually. So it's really valuable for that purpose. Also, it protects the stripe that's down in that trough from the snowplows. I know around here you have plenty of snow. Where I grew up, there was plenty of snow. And so being able to protect the bottom part of that stripe can allow you to sometimes get another year out of that pavement marking, even if the top layer kind of got scraped up. So there's some additional values practically from a maintenance perspective. It gives you additional, just can give you additional life in the stripe. Yes, sir.
So you reduce bicycle accidents because they won't go on that road.
All right, so bikes are a good point. And this is one, Missouri got very aggressive with rumble strips and put in hundreds and hundreds of miles and took the hit from bicyclists and other groups on roads like this that are like, what the heck are you doing? And we saved a lot of lives because of it. current guidance from Federal Highway Administration would be you really want to have 4 feet of shoulder here before you put in a rumble strip so that you have room for bicyclists as well. That would be kind of the official guidance. The advantage of the rumble stripe again would be to bring the rumble stripe, let's assume we have real shoulder, bring the rumble stripe into here so that the bicyclists have more room to ride outside the rumble strip. And that's some value of the rumble stripe again, is to have that space.
Well, looking at that road, you probably have to put shoulders on it anyway.
Potentially. It's not the prettiest thing ever.
It doesn't have shoulders. So.
Right, right. Well, and here's the situation, right? We determined that we've got crashes on this road. There's a lot of things we can do. Shoulders cost how much per mile? Jim, you probably know better than I do.
Depends upon how wide and what you gotta do, what you're building it for.
Right, but how many times more would they cost than rumble strip? 1,000 times more? 100, 300 times more? So that's kind of the idea. It's like, we're not going to be able to do everything we want here. What we could do is put in a rumble stripe for, if it's with the overlay job, almost nothing. I mean, it's just not.
Well, Missouri has a lot of roads that don't have shoulders.
Yes, sir, that's true. That is true.
Except for the newer ones that have been improved.
Right, absolutely.
My question was about, let's say there was a shoulder there or anything to the right of the white line. Is it required that that be chip sealed? In one of the counties I lived in Idaho, we as cyclists advocated not to chip seal anything to the right of the white line. And I'm wondering from the experts here, I would think that there would be an economic advantage not to chip seal to the right of the white line.
When you say right, you're meaning like someone coming
Yeah, going the other way, yeah, in the direction of traffic.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
So in that,
on this side.
yeah.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, any response from the?
No legal requirement. We've done it in Ada County Highway District on Hill Road years ago. We slurry sealed the shoulder because we wanted protection, and we chip sealed the vehicle lanes. The problem is slurry seal, you gotta keep traffic off the chips. You just get down there and ride right on it after it go over. But and Mailman went through all of the
the
shoulders.
Oh,
ITD is, I don't know, Greg can comment on that.
One thing that ITD started doing in the areas where they knew that they had bicyclists was they would just seal coat the travel lane, but then when they came back with their fog seal, they'd do the fog seal over the full width.
Yeah.
How did it work?
Works good because the bicycles like it a lot, and
Yeah.
you've still got protection for your shoulder. So.
As the travel lane where the cars are running, you'll where that surface are kind of opening up a little bit more for that forest, whereas where the bikes would run, you don't have that. So it just depends on where you're at on the Idaho system. I know in this area, they haven't really chip sealed that bicycle area on a lot of the major roadways like.
It seems kind of hit and miss, and so I was wondering.
It is because there's
as a
no set
cyclist,
policy.
Is there a policy decision or each individual highway district would make their own policy?
I think each individual district engineer will kind of make their own policy. There's no one set policy statewide. So, and it gives, I think, some flexibility in the fact that you don't have bicyclists, everywhere. So you'll have an opportunity to, while you're out there chip seal that full width to get that protection. So there's some judgment that goes into that.
The problem you're gonna have though too, if you don't shift your bike lane, is you're gonna start getting a lip. So you can have a chip in your
Right.
you'll have a chip and then you'll have you could be getting a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch chip, and then you're gonna have an indentation off your shoulder.
There's definitely trade-offs.
Yeah, all your fog seal basically is a thick coat of paint.
As with most things.
Yeah. All right, another example of a corridor solution is called a road diet. Karen and I actually drove one of these today. This is an example in Seattle. The basic idea is this, is you would take a 4-lane undivided roadway like you see on the left, the before shot, and change it from 2 lanes in each direction to 1 through lane in each direction with a 2-lane left turn lane in the middle. And then in a typical situation, you've got extra room on the outsides. So that can be used for parking, bicycle lanes, potential pedestrian treatments, depending on what the needs are in that community or at that location. The photo you see is an example pretty close to my house in Seattle. Seattle's been pretty aggressive with road diets over the last few years. I actually had the opportunity just in the last couple of years to write Federal Highways Guide. So Federal Highway has an informational guide for, what's it called? I should know. The Road Diet Informational Guide, I think is the name of it. And it has a lot of guidance on kind of how to do this. More importantly, even the feasibility factors of when you would want to do this and what some of the trade-offs and some of the issues are. It's becoming pretty popular in a lot of places around the country, particularly for other modes. So to be able to make room for parking, to make room for transit, make additional room for bicyclists. And in most cases, as long as you have your traffic studies set, we find that in a lot of cases there's plenty of capacity to still handle the traffic flow as needed. Because what happens sometimes in this before condition, if you have a lot of turning movements, a lot of left turners, that inside lane kind of becomes like a de facto left turn lane anyway, because it just does. You have a lot of people turning left, so people tend to avoid it. Or worse, this is a safety concern, is this is kind of your fast lane, right? And it's your left turn lane. You have people stopping to turn left, and then behind them you have people who are trying to blow through and go faster. So that's really the first kind of basic reason, or at least the safety reason that we might consider something like a road diet.
So this might be kind of silly, but as a standard, do you tend to center it? Or could you put all of your additional corridor on one side or the other and then encourage like a two-way pedestrian type of thing?
Yeah, you could do either. It's typically done centered like this, where you have like a bike lane on each side. But good question. In the city of Seattle in the last couple months, they took a one-lane road, a one-lane corridor, one of the downtown numbered roads, or numbered streets. And it was, I think, 4 lanes through, and they made it 3 lanes through, but kept those 3 where they were, and then the far left became a 2-way bike lane, protected, and it has a floating parking lane next to it. So it's got a lot going on. So it's got through lane, through lane, through lane, parking, 2-way bike lane. And then there's some delineators to try to kind of show some of that. And so it's pretty interesting stuff in a lot of different places around the country. But a lot of that is happening up here in the Northwest. Seattle, Portland, Boise, Salt Lake is doing a lot of the kind of interesting treatments like this. I think partially because there's innovation happening up here that doesn't tend to happen sometimes in other parts of the country. Part of it is there is some space, around here to do that. I know that Terry and I looked at a lot of roads that were under consideration for reducing the number of lanes because the capacity is not there. And then I was late to this meeting because we didn't have the capacity to quite get here on time. So,
sometimes, particularly in urban areas where you have parking, you may have 4 lanes with parking, and you have trouble with the parking, unparking in the right lane, left turns in the left lane, and so you're better off. You move more traffic if you widen up. If you change it to 3 lanes.
Yeah.
Widen the lanes and give them space. We done it 50 years ago north of here in Greensville, right through the business district.
Yeah.
It wasn't called road diets then.
I know, I'm glad you said that.
It's common sense.
This whole idea of we did it 50 years ago is something that Terry and I talked about today, and I've talked about with colleagues over the years. Yeah, I'm in my mid-career, right? I'm still fairly young in this, and it's very interesting how many bright ideas I think I had that I came up with, that I talked to someone like Jim or others who have been around who've done this work as long as I've been alive, and they kind of giggle at me and show me something from 1968, right, or from 1974, or from 1982, or from all those years, because every decade these things spiral back around and we have ideas on how to fix things. And most of this kind of stuff comes from traffic engineers who are trying to solve a problem, and they don't have the answer in the design manual, right? Because the design manual doesn't give you all the answers,
use some
especially innovative solutions. Right, it's a common sense thing, which is what I've always thought like traffic engineers are like the common sense engineers, because they're trying to make stuff work in the existing footprint with hardly any money and just making something a little bit better than it was, which is often what we try to do. Yeah, Terry.
If you do the 2-way bike lane on the one side of the road, you violate drivers' expectations. So there's a lot of need to do a lot of additional things to get the driver's attention. The green lanes, the sometimes bike signals for special phases.
Seattle has these, Seattle has bicycle signals at each intersection.
Yeah.
They have the color lanes, and they have delineators between the bicycle lanes and the floating parking. Now, the floating parking is between these 2-way bike lane and the 1-way travel lane, so that provides some buffer. But you're right. There's There's a lot going on there, for sure, and it's brand new, and they're still tweaking it and figuring it all out. Yeah.
There's guidelines out, the National Association of Cities put out that give you some ideas, a whole book of patterns of basically things that have been tried and some are working and that sort of thing. So there's some guidelines out there, they're not research-based, but they do address some of these issues pretty well.
Yeah, very
You
good.
didn't call them road diets, you know, people don't like diets.
Oh my gosh.
So,
We're not gonna do this today because we don't have time,
Yeah.
but we've had
Anyway,
hours of
information
discussion about whether to keep the name. Road diets kind of became the nomenclature in the late nineties,
that's
and
right.
there's been some papers written in the late nineties and early 2000s. God, we should talk after. We did a whole, I can't tell you how many hours we talked about whether to keep the name or get rid of the name. And Federal Highway eventually decided to keep it. Yeah, I'm gonna stop. I could go on for a while. Cable barrier I want to talk about. Cable barrier is in the median typically of freeways and expressways, high-speed freeways and expressways. It would be a kind of a lower cost solution to having a concrete median down the road, an extremely lot lower, like 1/10 the cost or less. Basically to catch cars that are crossing the median. So instead of having cars cross the median, they're catching them in the middle. They're not designed to catch semis. This one happened to catch a semi. This is on Interstate 70 between Kansas City and St. Louis in the state of Missouri. This photo was actually in the USA Today. I didn't take it. I kind of wish I had. But they did an article about this back. This is years ago now, 2005, 2006. We stretched hundreds of miles of this stuff from 03 to 2010, all over the place. And I've got a little bit of data I want to show you about how effective they were because they were pretty awesome. We can talk about this for a second. Yeah, any thoughts on cable barrier?
Well, cable barrier is one of the things, when Missouri was using it and started to show their success with it, we tried it to see if we could get it a few places in Idaho, and where we ran into resistance was actually from law enforcement, because if they ever see one example of somewhere where it wasn't installed right or something like that, and somebody got the roof sliced off or something like that, you know, then they say that's what's going to happen for the whole thing. And so they really dug their heels in and wouldn't buy it as a safety improvement.
Yeah, what happens with cable, so we put them in very early. We were kind of on the bleeding edge of technology with cable. If you go to Missouri now and look at it, every 6 months the research was changing, the standards were changing. And so there's a whole patchwork quilt of designs of the cable barrier. The placement should be right in the middle. Well, yeah, that looks pretty good. Well, actually, it's getting a bunch of water in it, so you need to move it right off the middle. Oh, if you put it right off the middle, then the low-profile cars can get under it. Oh, we need to move it up to the top. If you move it up towards the top, people hate it because it feels uncomfortable, like it's too close. And we went through a whole kind of rigmarole of where should this cable be? Where's the best place for it in terms of effectiveness, in terms of the public being able to accept it. And every once in a while someone gets through, but most of the time they don't. And so what we found, one of the issues we ran into with law enforcement was it did hinder their ability to hop the median to go catch a speeder the other way, which is something that they wanted to do. So what we needed to do with them, so two answers to that. One was, yes, that is true. And you're going to be scraping a lot less bodies off the roadway. That actually wasn't from us, that was from law enforcement telling us that we see this as there is a disbenefit, is that we can't get across the median like we want to as quickly. But the benefit is we're responding to fewer fatal crashes. And so it was a net significant benefit to them, say the State Highway Patrol. But what we did to try to mitigate that was be sure that we had some kind of access point. I think it was every 2 miles. So either an interchange or an emergency turnaround that both our maintenance crews and law enforcement, any emergency vehicles could use every 2 miles. And that was the kind of the compromise that we came up with. And a number of states have done things that are similar to try to deal with that issue. Because it is different. You know, it has changed the way that they enforce speed on the interstates because of all this medians, all the medians that are up.
And it's interesting, we haven't gone big into cable barrier, and the example I used, and we kind of took a little bit of heat, was Washington, it's very narrow. As soon as you cross the border to Idaho, the median was way wide.
Yeah.
When we look at this, do a crash analysis on the data that we have, we've got a lot of great data, we weren't seeing a lot of median crossovers, and so we have the luxury of a lot of real estate here, and medians tend to be very, very wide, or if they're just extremely down to nothing, we use cable rail or guardrail.
Yeah, it'd be guardrail or even concrete.
And so,
You're right. So,
just
yeah.
one size doesn't fit all. And-
Yeah, that's a good point. It is kind of that middle ground. Like this one, I don't know if you can see, this is about 40 foot stripe to stripe on Interstate 70 in most cases. It gets up to 60. When you get up into the 80, 100 foot, you know, cable maybe isn't the best solution all the time. Although plenty of people have gotten hurt and killed on 80 foot medians too. So
And
you know,
one
it's,
thing we took a look at too, or kind of thought about is like, remember we got into the discussion of crash type is consistent crash location is random.
right.
You'll cure 10 miles or 12 miles of an area, and then all of a sudden crashes move down the next 12.
That's exactly what we did.
And you're gonna
Yeah.
go clear across the country.
We
So
started
you
on
have to-
I-70 finding locations that had crashes, and we kind of did bits and pieces of cable, and the overall crashes stayed the same because people just missed it, right?
Yeah,
They
the only
literally
loss-
crossed the median.
So it's not all bad, you just have to be kind of prepared in your budgeting to.
Right, so that's what we
So
did.
people
We used
do
a
that.
particular funding source to stretch the entire stretch between St. Louis and Kansas City. And that
Right.
was, that was the solution that worked for us.
The only lawsuits you had in Missouri with the cable barrier was the locations where you hadn't put it in yet.
Right, exactly. Like, why wasn't it there yet?
You,
Exactly.
you was a mile away. Why didn't you put it in this mile instead of that one?
And that's happened in a number of states too. Once you start doing something that people like, if there's a location that doesn't have it, you can get yourself in trouble. All right, a couple of just quick examples of just some results that we've seen from a couple improvements. This first one is actually a combination. This is in Minnesota, actually in Minneapolis. And the problem that they were having was in some of their urban interstates, people were just crazy. They were driving over 80 miles per hour, especially in some of these kind of peak or afternoon times of day. So this is, as an example, the Friday of Memorial Day weekend, the number of drivers that were driving over 80. This is a 55 mile per hour speed limit, and it was just obviously being ignored, as you can see by the number of drivers over 80. So here's what they did. Two things. They raised the speed limit to 65, which was a little controversial, as you might imagine. But they also enforced the heck out of it. So, and they made a big campaign about it. They did public stuff and basically said, here's what we're going to do. We're using engineering to say, hey, this shouldn't be a 55 mile per hour interstate. This should probably be something higher. We realize that. We're going to sign it as such. And secondly, you're going to drive 65 if we're going to sign it 65. So they got together, had this campaign, got enforcement out there. And so then a year later, they did analysis on the exact same stretch of road on Memorial Day weekend, the Friday of 2005, I guess, the year after. And this is what they ended up with the next year. They had nothing, like pretty much nothing over 80 based on this treatment. So it was this idea that by raising the speed limit, they reduced speeds, which is a little bit counterintuitive. But it's because they partnered together with their enforcement folks to do more than just one thing.
Did they keep up the enforcement at that level for years and years to come, or did?
Well, this is the thing, right, is that
Back
could
up.
that, and this is like 10 years ago now, right? So I haven't gone back and seen what it looked like. But what we do know historically is that if you set your speed limits at a kind of safe and or what people deem to be reasonable, then they tend to follow that speed better. So it was so quote unquote ridiculous, or seemed so unreasonable, this 55 and everybody's driving 70, that if you can bring it closer, then you can get people. There's this whole speed differential issue too. If you want to keep your speeds largely the same, right? And you want to keep people driving about the same speed for the sake of reducing conflicts. Jim.
Idaho raised some sections of interstate to 80 last year, and the report we had last couple weeks, a week ago. But the remarkable thing that happened is that at 70, the state police only enforce speeds at 79. They raised the speed limit to 80, which is what people were driving. And now they're enforcing 82, 83 miles per hour, which is what they should have been doing before. But the speed really didn't change that much. And they raised the speed limit up to what people were driving, but then they started enforcing that speed limit.
Yeah, that's interesting. Man, at some point though, you get to 80, and at some point you got
But
physics.
there's no change in the accident so far that they can tell.
Yeah, man, at some point you got physics issues, right? Like if you get any kind of crash at 80 or 90 miles per hour, I mean, I've seen some before where this awful one where there's a minivan, the estimated speed was 110, I think, and literally the entire seat, like the seat came out of the minivan and it's got a car seat in it, but the kid or the baby was still killed because the entire seat flew out of the car because You get the forces are so strong at some point when you get to 100 miles per hour that the cars aren't designed to.
80
be
miles
crash.
an hour with the big trucks on the road, I think it's too fast, but
It feels fast.
I'm getting conservative in my old age.
Understood. All right, one quick story. This is Cableberry. We've talked about it a lot, right? So I want to just give this one story about what happened in Missouri. So we put cable median barrier on I-70 and another interstate called I-44 that went from St. Louis down to the city called Springfield. And 1 year before on these two roadways, need a caveat, these happened not the exact same year. There's kind of like a combination of data here, and we can talk about the details later on if needed. There are 49 fatalities. These are cross-median fatalities that happened. So someone crossed the median and somebody got killed in that crash. 49 people died in the calendar year before these were installed. It took a few years on each of these locations to get them totally installed. But 1 year after installation was complete on each of these interstates, there were less, 3. So this is big, right? This is 46 lives, 46 people who didn't get killed in crashes, who got caught by the cable. So I kind of became known for this stuff in the state. I started getting emails from people, friends of mine, colleagues, people from other states that said, hey, my grandma just ran into this cable barrier, thanks so much for putting it up. Or I think my dad would have died last week, except he ended up in this cable barrier. And I'm just like, it's like goosebump month, right? I'm getting these emails of things that we're really actually doing legitimate, like real-time good with this particular treatment, both because of the treatment, also because we structured across the country, or across the state, because we felt like that was the right thing to do. Overall, Missouri fatalities have reduced by 500, exactly 500, from 2005 to 2013. That's a lot. It's a big number. I think it's the biggest, or one of the biggest in the country. And I was only there for a part of the beginning of that, right? I left MoDOT in, I think, 2008, 2007, maybe, 2008. So I feel fortunate I got to kind of be part of the beginning of that. And then they really took it on and really pushed this systemic idea, pushed hard some of these treatments that we talked about today, and have seen significant benefits from that. And just to kind of show you what 500 fatalities looks like, this isn't it. This is like 300, right? So that's actually, this is running off the page. I couldn't get them to all fit on one screen. And this isn't like 500 in 10 years. This is 500 per year. So we have 500 fewer people dying in 2013, 2014, 2015 than we had 8 or 9 years ago in 2005, right? These are big, big numbers. And you can see nationally, the number went from about 42,000 to about 34,000 nationally in the last decade or so as well. Like we're having really significant benefits for a number of different reasons, which we're going to talk about in 1 second, because I want to talk about investments and the different sources of safety funding. I'm not even going to get into these in detail. I think actually the next speaker next month or next time is going to talk a little bit more about some of the detailed safety funding pieces. The top one, HSIP, is kind of the infrastructure side. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about today can be funded by Highway Safety Improvement Program monies. The next one, NHTSA, is the agency, the federal agency that gets into the human behavior stuff in a little bit more detail. So they have a lot of separate pockets of funding, some directly connected to alcohol, some directly connected to young drivers or maybe seatbelts, things like that. But focus on the behavioral side. Of course, states have safety funds that they can use. And here's the big thing. There's nothing that I can think of that is a funding source that is disallowed to be used for a safety project. Right, especially some of the larger ones. There's some larger funding sources that are kind of general that a state has or that a city has or that a county has. And almost all those can be used for safety projects. So I think that's an important thing to know. Is we're not just talking about, hey, safety funding, let's get more safety funding to use for safety stuff, but you can use a lot of funding sources to make your roads safer. All right, so then here's the question. Is there really a correlation? If we spend more money on safety, can we really see an increase in the safety? Can we see a reduction in fatals or a reduction in crashes based on just spending money? Is there like a 1-to-1 ratio? Are we really getting an ROI, return on investment, from our safety spending? And I'm going to switch to another program real quick. And I just realized, because we got in late, I forgot to fire this up. Give me 1 second. This is a presentation I gave a couple years ago at an ITE meeting down in Orlando. based on a study that I did about 5 years ago. So the data is a little bit old. I wanted to say that out loud. And I'm not sure if this is going to work with it. We're going to find out. Oh, it does. Awesome. Okay. So this is a presentation kind of about funding and about asking this question. Does an increase in safety funding investment lead to reduced fatalities? And so here's the basic map. And this is showing there's this big downturn in fatalities in about 2005 from 2009, which is what most of this data is. And you see a significant drop here. That's the one that's going down. And about that same time, safety investments went way up. The Federal Highway Administration, or the US DOT, or Congress actually, decided to put a big additional chunk of money into the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is that one that leads to these safety investments. So, this is like an easy way to say, well, yeah, look, yes, but hang on, there's a lot of other stuff, right? There are a lot of reasons that we thought, or we think, or we talked about in 09, 2010, that might have been other reasons that the fatalities went down, right? So one of them was, maybe seatbelts. The seatbelt use increased. We had heard that maybe it increased. Here's the data from that. In fact, seatbelt use did increase a little bit, but not nearly enough to see that there's not nearly enough to basically say that that's it, right? That's really not it. There's a little bit more seatbelt use, but it's really relatively flat over that time period. All right, well, what about airbags? What about the vehicles are safer now? We talk about this all the time. Vehicles are safer than ever, and that's why fatalities are going down, because the vehicles are safer. We use airbags to be, at least kind of a piece of data we could get to say this is showing that we have a more safe vehicle fleet. And it's true, right? The number of cars with airbags in them that are in the fleet of vehicles on the road, the population of cars people drive, has gone up, but it's gone up pretty steady. So if we thought that was correlated with fatalities, well, the fatalities should kind of be going down at the same rate the airbags are going up, right? So they stay flat while the airbags are going up, and then as the airbags kind of get a little flatter, well, that's when the fatalities went down. So that doesn't feel like a correlation. And then the big one is, what about the economy? The economy tanked, right, in the late 2000s, mid to late 2000s. So this has got to be the reason, right? The economy went down, so that's why. Here's the surrogate or the data point that we used for the economy was the unemployment rate. So to say that that's, we can argue whether that's the best data to use, maybe not. But we see the unemployment rate is kind of up and down a little bit. But there is kind of there's something there, right? So there's about 2006 and moving up, the unemployment rate went up quite a bit while the fatalities started to go down. So there's a little bit of a correlation. What we thought might be a better correlation, though, would be, well, okay, so the economy went down, but what about the economy going down would connect directly to traffic fatalities? And our thought was, well, people aren't driving as much, right? If the economy, just because the economy's bad doesn't mean there'll be less fatalities. But if the economy's bad, there needs to be some middle ground. So people are driving less, maybe, and then that would lead to less fatalities. Then when the economy gets better, people start driving more again, and fatalities go back up. That's the story that we wanted to try to look into. So we took a look at traffic volume to see if there's some correlation here between fatalities and VMT. And we can see there's a little bit, right? It was VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, the total vehicle miles that people travel in the United States. Did go down a little bit in kind of 08, 09, but not nearly to the degree that fatalities went down, right? So that didn't feel like a correlation. But if we look at a model here, and this is going to get a little meaty, so I'm going to just go through it fast. But if we wanted to say, can we quantify what the benefit might have been, like how the HSIP. HSIP is the Highway Safety Improvement Program, so safety funding. As that investment went up, there's this gap here between, we would have estimated the fatalities, you can see that kind of bluish or purplish one, probably blue, I'm colorblind, remember, with the X's on it. That's what we would have estimated. They should have gone down so much just because VMT went down, right? So we would have expected some decrease. We had quite a bit more decrease than that. There's this gap of how much the fatalities went down versus what we would have expected it to go down in that same period. And we can model that gap. So this is what that gap is. So this is what the investment trend, let me go back. This is what the investment trend would have been, because it was going up a little bit. already. This is safety investment dollars in safety. Okay. But what it really did is it went up a lot more. There's this spike in the legislation at the time in 2005 that allowed us to get a lot more. And there's this gap here of how much more money was obligated that we actually spent on safety nationwide. And that gap matters. And so that gap is something that we focus on in our analysis to say, let's kind of map, how did those safety investments go up? And then what was the, and this is kind of meaty again, and it's a little bit hard, and what was the actual decrease in traffic fatalities? So traffic fatalities went down from this baseline of like, say, 38,000, down to like 32,000 here, which is why you have 6,000 here. And the safety investment kind of went up at the same rate, and it's kind of creepy that they actually did match each other. And again, I only call this a correlation. I don't say there's a causation here, and that's kind of more statistic words of, these are correlated, right? These are matching up together. Lots of random things match up together sometimes. So it's not to say that this was a cause. I don't think it's necessarily the cause. I think there's lots of reasons. But I do think safety investments played a part. And I think some would say that they didn't. It was only the economy. It was only the other stuff that we talked about. But I think that this is part of the puzzle. There's a couple things, little caveats to mention at the end here, is there are some other contributors. I mentioned NHTSA before. NHTSA handles the human behavior stuff. They also contributed some additional money, and people are being safer on the road potentially, or maybe drunk driving is going down. There's some other factors here that factor into this. This muck thing just means data, crash data. Are we getting better data? Are we getting, by using better data, are we making the road safer? Potentially, and that wasn't factored into the study. And what about strategic highway safety plans? We have more core coalitions of enforcement, engineers, MAD, other groups that are coming together to develop these big umbrella plans. And we think that may have something to do with fatalities going down too. And that's not directly connected to investment of dollars. That's people coming together and having more meetings and figuring out how to do things strategically. And that probably had some effect too. That actually really ramped up about the same time period. So there are some other factors, some other contributors that factored in. But what we kind of landed on was, our analysis suggested this, that the increase in safety investments provided a tremendous savings in terms of lives saved and the societal cost of traffic fatalities. The basic answer is, yeah, we think that spending more money on safety provides a significant safety benefit and helps us save lives. We think it has in the past, and we think it's going to continue in the future. That was very fast. Actually, I'm just gonna go to my, that's where we're at. So I'm gonna go to my kind of end slide here. And just say, because of that, I do believe that investing our dollars, investing our money in transportation, and particularly in transportation safety, is very much a worthy endeavor. Somebody had mentioned, I think, this roadway fatality problem is a public health issue. It is, people are getting killed on the roadways, and a lot of the people who are getting killed on the roadways are young. You know, they're, I believe, I wish I had this stat in my head, something like roadway fatalities in the United States is the #1 killer of kids aged 6 to 19. Don't write that down, because it's not exactly right. But there's something like that. It is significant. It is #1 for a certain age group in that range. We have solutions that we know work. We know that there's things we can do on the roadway to make the road safer. And we feel like we get a return on our investment, that return on investment is saving lives. My contact information, happy to answer any questions that you have. You know, I'm going to hang out here for quite a while, or as long as anybody else wants to stay. I am on Twitter, I am on LinkedIn. If you're interested, I do have cards or can find them. But I would love to talk more about this. And I realize I kind of bypassed that whole funding thing, so any questions you have on that, happy to even go back and look at some of those slides if you want to, or talk about some of that in more detail. But I realized I was coming up on my time, which is why I kind of blew through that last part a little bit fast. So any questions? Yeah, please.
If 93% of it's drivers, why are cities, counties, and states not doing more about cracking down on violators? I mean, every day I see an unlimited number of people breaking traffic laws, thus endangering my life, my family's life. You know, why not crank fines way up to where it's actually a deterrent to get a ticket? Because right now, in Idaho, a lot of tickets are really cheap. So,
yeah.
You know,
I think that there's
running a red light to $500.
There's two sides. So there's this, right? There's this argument of let's enforce harder, And then I get a speeding ticket and say, why aren't you catching the real criminals? Right? So they get pressure on both sides, and they do. I often give them pressure to enforce more. A lot of pressure from the public, from the who knows who. If they're an elected sheriff, they get even more pressure because they don't want to pull over their buddy or their friend or the people who are going to vote for them next time around. There's a lot of reasons that it's difficult, but you're right. I think that's one piece of the
A
puzzle.
lot of drivers just become complacent with traffic laws.
Right.
And it's just.
Yeah, we didn't talk about automated enforcement today. I know that's something that you all do or can't do. I'm seeing some heads and some laughs and some giggles. But it's becoming significantly beneficial in some states and definitely in some other countries. Both speed, automated enforcement, red light running automated enforcement, and to the point that some of the times the systems are becoming insolvent, like they can't keep them running because there's not enough red light runners to get enough tickets to keep the things up, which is exactly what they're supposed to do, right? So they're working very well.
If they raised fines up enough, some people would not drive poorly because they wouldn't want to pay the higher fines. But the higher fines could pay for extra enforcement. But then you could even earmark money for road improvements. You could earmark money for schools.
Right.
Schools need money. The police department, you could earmark all that extra money to go to these different things.
Absolutely. Now, one argument I've heard against, this is just recently, I was in a state having a conversation like this, and they have a very high seatbelt fine in this state, and they tend to not enforce it because they don't want to give mom with 2 jobs and 3 kids a $150 seatbelt fine.
You shouldn't have breaking the law.
Right? Exactly. But this is the mentality of an officer saying, I don't feel comfortable giving a high ticket. So I think if the fines get to a certain height, then they become, in real life, not enforced by the officers because they don't want to enforce something that changes someone's life because they were speeding because they didn't have their seatbelt on. That's what I'm hearing.
There's a lot of warning
Right.
tickets given out too. That should
Absolutely.
They should actually if they're getting pulled over, they should get a ticket. That's the way I feel about it.
Yeah. Understood. Brent?
Yeah, just real quick commentary. In Idaho, it's a secondary law with a whopping $10 fine, and I think we're tied with Missouri on that. That being the lowest in the nation. And if you're 18 or younger, you get to pay the $51.50 court cost, so your kids are going to get fined more. But my, thought on that is, even if you go to 25, you'll see significance. The science shows that if you go to a primary law, your seatbelt usage will increase by 10%. And we're at 80% right now in Idaho in our last survey, which was about 6 months ago. So I guess just real briefly, my commentary on that is contact your legislature. We have a lot of information that we're happy to share that's science-based, and that we're not lobbyists, but we're information sharers, and we're happy to do that. And we think that there's very value that's science-based by going to a primary law and just going from $10 to $25, or including just the $51.50 court cost would probably have some real benefit in the state. To law enforcement's credit, our partners in law enforcement, they continue to enforce vigorously the $10 fine where they can. It just amazes me how many citations are written statewide, and in fact, they can't pull you over unless there's some other offensive attendant. They'll sometimes let that go because they believe wholeheartedly in the seatbelt message and they try to promote that. So just a little Idaho perspective there for you. So do pick up your phone or write your letter. And I think that we could see a primary law really help. And we are not using the word reduce in our office or promoting. We like the word eliminate death and suicide. Reduce is a good word on our way to our ultimate goal and where our towards zero is. So just a little commentary.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. That's why we're here. Terry.
Question of Brent, are we losing federal highway money because don't have a primary law, we don't have a helmet law for motorcycles?
We have lots of those.
Helmets, no, we did have, at a period of time, we did lose $5.5 million in federal highway funds that was there from NHTSA, basically. All we had to do was pass a primary law. We already have a law, it's a secondary law. And really in Idaho, it's very conservative, so the pushback is freedom of choice state. So no, we had that opportunity, but it's long gone.
So we're not losing every year some money.
No, it was extra money we could have got.
It has come and gone. So we had to demonstrate a 90% usage rate of seatbelts for 2 years running, or go to a primary law.
So, these guys, you all are traffic engineers and looking at this for a long time. I'm fairly new to looking at this, but my observation is that on the one hand, we see areas which we need to invest in expanding capacity, because the level of service is projected to reach, EF soon. You have crash data, you have congestion. So we go in there and we say, we're gonna make this major investment in widening a road to reduce those. And then, when we get fatalities on them, after we've made this massive investment, we come back and we say, well, now we have to look at, because while we don't have these fender benders that we had when we had our congestion, or we've saved a few seconds in commute time, the consequences are that when we do have crashes, or we do have pedestrian and vehicle collisions, there's fatalities. But how come we didn't ask that question in the beginning to say, maybe we can live with some level of service F for a period of time, because the trade-off for those extra seconds is the risk of greater fatalities. But it seems to me they're two separate, analyses, and this is in urban areas. I'm not talking, I drove here on U-stick, and nobody drove the speed. I drove the speed limit on U-stick between 4 and 5 o'clock at 35 miles an hour. Newly expanded. People who commute and use it love it, but it's also right up against neighborhoods. I also spent 2 hours with somebody whose child was killed on a Sunday on U-stick crossing because someone looked and they had the road to themselves. So we designed it, well, the sign said 35. Yeah, it's designed to look like, you have 5 lanes.
Yeah, no, you're definitely onto something.
So
this capacity.
How come we can't do this at the front end before we spend all the money to build it or expand it, and do that analysis and then make the hard decision on the front end instead of spending the money here and
my guess would be, not only Idaho, is that those decisions, it was a hard decision, and there was discussion of that at the front end, and safety didn't win that argument that day, because that's often what happened in my case.
Yeah, my observation is safety is assumed to be a problem in congestion. It is not assumed to be a problem if you relieve congestion. You relieve congestion, therefore it's going to be safe, and if there is a problem, it's 100% the driver's fault because they're speeding. And, they're driving the conditions, which are a super wide, dry road. And wow, I've been given this nice dry road. If it was in the desert, no problem. If you got neighborhoods right up against the other.
No, I think you're less new to this than you say you are, because we've had this is the kind of discussion that is definitely had in those environments of how do you balance those things and what is the downside of congestion relief as it relates to safety, part of the discussion. Brent, did you have something?
No, I mean, that's.
Historically, I think major road improvements actually result in a reduced crash rate rather than an increase. Now, you may have some change in severity, but you have an overall reduction in collision.
Yeah, and that gets back, one thing we didn't talk about today is what's the definition of safety? We didn't really say that at the beginning, but there's kind of a couple different definitions. Are you reducing crashes, or are you reducing severe crashes? Are you talking about blood on the pavement, or are we talking about everything? And all of them can be important in different discussions, right? It's not only fatalities, it's also severe injuries, it's also minor injuries, it's also, it's been a pain in the butt to be in the fender bender, and it wasn't my fault, and I'm gonna, lose hundreds of dollars probably anyway, so it's like even the property damage only crashes are like, they impact people, so it's like not to forget about those. But at the end of the day, I kind of tend to be focused on this end of the severity of the crashes. I think, let people go if they want to go, and then we can keep going. Okay. Any love, everybody.
Thank you, Brian. Real quickly, before